The first time I noticed the cross missing, it wasn't because someone tore it off the wall. It was still there, polished and decorative, glowing softly under stage lights, but in the sound filling the room it had vanished. The lyrics soared about victory, favor, elevation, dreams coming true, yet never once lingered on blood, surrender, or death to self. Hands were raised, eyes closed, tears falling, but something deeper stayed untouched. It felt like standing before a locked door while convincing myself I was inside the house. The cross is not comfortable. It interrupts pride and demands everything. When worship removes it, the music may swell, but the soul never breaks open. Power doesn't flow from volume or talent. It flows from yielded hearts kneeling at a place where ego dies and mercy begins. I remember the cross when I needed it least, when life was easy and faith felt like background music. But when darkness pressed in, success lost its shine, and my strength collapsed, the songs I had memorized could not hold me. They promised lifting without dying, crowns without thorns. In that silence, the cross reappeared, not as a symbol, but as a stark invitation. Come here, it whispered, where nothing is hidden and nothing is earned. Worship that avoids the cross creates followers who know how to sing but not how to endure. The cross teaches us how to stay when prayers aren't answered quickly, how to trust when heaven feels quiet. Without it, worship becomes a mirror reflecting us back to ourselves instead of a window opening toward God. The cross carries weight, and weight is what many songs are afraid of. Weight bends knees. Weight silences applause. Weight strips language down to groans and whispers. In a room full of perfect harmonies, the cross feels disruptive, like a crack of thunder in a rehearsed performance. But thunder is how storms announce rain. When the cross is absent, worship becomes light, easy to lift, easy to forget. Nothing presses the heart into humility. Nothing confronts the addiction to control. I have seen rooms filled with sound yet empty of conviction, because the cross had been replaced with affirmation. The cross does not affirm us. It transforms us. It doesn't say, "You're fine as you are." It says, "You are loved enough to be changed," and that message still terrifies the flesh. There is a moment in every redemption story when the music drops out and the character stands alone, exposed with no speech left to give. That is the cross moment. No soundtrack can soften it. No lighting can dramatize it. Worship that bypasses this moment creates believers who fear brokenness and confuse comfort with God's presence. The cross teaches us to worship while bleeding, to trust while misunderstood, to love without applause. When songs skip that road, they raise expectations God never promised. I learned that power doesn't erupt when the crowd cheers. It descends when someone whispers, "Not my will." The cross is where strength looks like surrender and loss becomes the doorway to life. Without it, worship becomes noise that cannot resurrect anything buried deep inside. I have watched worship regain its power when the cross returned, not shouted, not forced, but honored. The atmosphere changed, not because the band improved, but because honesty entered the room. People stopped posing and started confessing. Tears didn't fall from emotional crescendos, but from recognition. This is where I belong, empty-handed. The cross doesn't attract the proud, it calls the desperate. It doesn't compete with spectacle, it dismantles it. When worship carries the cross, it carries permission to be undone, to admit weakness, to lay down the carefully built image. That is where power waits, not in perfection, but in surrender that keeps unfolding breath after breath, song after song, as hearts remain open at a place that never flatters, only heals. The room was thick with sound, layered harmonies rolling like warm waves. Lights dimmed just enough to make everything feel holy. I felt something. No, many things. Release. A rush that made my chest loosen and my eyes burn. For a moment, it felt like healing. But later, when the music faded and the silence returned, nothing had actually changed. The same habits waited. The same compromises stood untouched. Emotion had carried me high and gently set me down in the same place. That's when I understood how spiritual sedation works. It doesn't attack, it soothes. It doesn't deny God, it dulls the urgency of truth. It numbs conviction until discomfort feels unnecessary. Emotion alone can make you feel alive while quietly keeping you asleep, mistaking movement for transformation, tears for repentance, sensation for surrender. Sedation doesn't look dangerous, it looks peaceful. It wraps truth in softness until its sharp edges are gone. I began noticing how often I chased the feeling instead of the change, how worship became a place to escape myself instead of confront myself. Truth demands response, emotion asks only to be felt. Truth interrupts patterns, emotion massages them. I realized I loved moments that stirred me but avoided words that exposed me. Spiritual sedation trains you to associate God with comfort alone, not correction. You learn to fear conviction as negativity and rebuke as unloving. But the truth is, love that never wounds is not love. It's anesthesia. It keeps the soul calm while the infection spreads. I stayed comfortable, convinced I was growing, unaware that numbness had replaced hunger and intensity had replaced obedience. In every redemption story, there is a scene where the illusion shatters, where the character realizes the high wasn't healing, it was hiding. Mine came quietly, no dramatic fall, no public failure, just the slow ache of realizing I couldn't hear God clearly anymore. His voice hadn't left, my ears had dulled. Emotion had taught me to listen for crescendos instead of commands. Truth speaks even when the music stops. It doesn't always tremble the body, but it pierces the heart. When truth finally broke through, it didn't feel good. It felt heavy, confronting, undeniable. It named things I had buried under worship playlists and conference moments. But with the discomfort came clarity. Sedation fades fast when truth enters, and awakening always hurts before it heals. There's a reason truth feels abrasive in rooms built on emotion. It refuses to cooperate with pretense. Truth doesn't care if the atmosphere is right. It speaks in silence, in failure, in unanswered prayers. Emotion can cry at the altar and still walk away unchanged. Truth follows you home. It waits in your decisions, your private habits, your quiet compromises. I learned that a church drunk on emotion can celebrate while drifting, mistaking intensity for intimacy. Truth sobers the soul. It asks hard questions and offers no shortcuts. It doesn't rush the process or reward the performance. And yet it is truth, not emotion, that carries resurrection power. Emotion may lift your hands. Truth bends your will. Emotion moves crowds. Truth remakes lives one surrendered heart at a time. The awakening wasn't loud. It was steady. I stopped asking, did this move me? And started asking, did this change me? Truth became less dramatic but more alive. It cut, yes, but it also cleared space for something real. Emotion returned too, but no longer as the driver, only as a response. When truth leads, emotion follows in its proper place, no longer sedating but igniting. I began to feel again, not the rush of escape, but the deep burn of alignment. Conviction no longer felt like condemnation. It felt like invitation. The music mattered less, the honesty more. Truth had woken me up, and staying awake required courage. To remain teachable, responsive, undone, letting truth keep speaking even when it doesn't feel good, even when there is no song to soften the sound. I remember when everything started needing to be current, the language, the tone, the atmosphere. Like holiness itself had an expiration date. The room was designed to feel familiar, safe, almost casual, as if awe would scare people away. God was spoken of warmly but rarely waited on. His name fit neatly into sentences but no longer arrested them. Reverence had been traded for approachability, and we called it wisdom. Yet something ancient in my spirit felt displaced, like stepping into a sacred place and finding the ground carpeted to soften the weight of glory. When relevance becomes the goal, God is subtly reduced to what fits the moment. We begin shaping him into something understandable rather than surrendering to something holy, forgetting that what draws hearts isn't similarity, but presence that feels unmistakably other. The pursuit of relevance taught us how to sound current, but not how to stand still. Silence became awkward. Weight felt uncomfortable. Moments that once invited trembling were rushed to keep attention. I learned how easy it is to explain God without encountering him, to speak about him without bowing before him. Reverence takes time, relevance demands speed. Reverence humbles, relevance flatters. In trying to remove barriers, we removed mystery. We replaced holy fear with casual confidence, calling God friend while forgetting he is also fire. The language softened, but so did our posture. Knees that once bent slowly now stayed standing. Eyes that once searched heaven now scanned screens. We stayed engaged but rarely undone, informed but not transformed. Something eternal was being traded for something trending, and no one noticed because everything still looked successful. There is always a moment in redemption when the noise fades and the character realizes what's missing. For me, it was an unexpected stillness. No lights, no music, no clever words. Just the awareness that God didn't feel small, I had made him small. Reverence returned like gravity, pulling everything into alignment. It reminded me that God does not need to be made relevant. He defines relevance. His presence bends time, silences pride, exposes the illusion of control. In that moment, I understood that relevance seeks permission, but reverence recognizes authority. One asks to be accepted, the other commands surrender, and surrender is what I had avoided, dressing it up as accessibility, when in truth I feared being undone by something greater than myself. Reverence reintroduces holy interruption. It allows moments that cannot be managed, explained, or packaged. It creates space where God is not rushed and outcomes are not guaranteed. I began to see how often we protect momentum instead of honoring presence. We fear that if things slow down, people will leave, but reverence believes the right people stay when God is honored, not when he is edited. When reverence enters a room, self-consciousness exits, performance loses its grip. Applause fades into silence, and silence becomes full. It is there that hearts bow before bodies do, where tears fall not from emotion but from recognition. This is holy ground. Relevance entertains the mind, reverence reshapes the soul. I didn't abandon relevance. I dethroned it. It no longer led, it followed. Words mattered again because they pointed upward, not inward. Songs breathed slower, heavier, truer. God was no longer introduced. He was acknowledged. Reverence changed the way I listened, waited, and spoke. It taught me that accessibility without awe empties worship of its weight. When reverence leads, relevance naturally finds its place, not as a strategy, but as a byproduct of authenticity. People don't encounter God because he feels familiar. They encounter him because he feels real. And real presence always leaves a mark, quietly rearranging priorities, restoring wonder, and calling the soul back to its rightful posture before something infinitely greater. I didn't realize I was being taught until I noticed what surfaced when life collapsed. In the quiet moments of fear, when no preacher stood nearby and no notes were open, it wasn't sermons that rose from memory, it was lyrics. Lines repeated so often they had woven themselves into my reflexes, shaping how I spoke to God when words ran thin. I sang what I believed long before I could explain it. That's when it became clear melodies slip past defenses. They lodge in the heart where doctrine rarely reaches. A sermon demands attention. A song asks for permission and then stays. Long after the building empties, lyrics echo in hospital rooms, in midnight prayers, in moments when theology stops being theory and becomes survival. What we sing becomes the vocabulary of faith when everything else falls silent. I began tracing my beliefs backward, following the trail of phrases I leaned on. Some carried strength and truth, others sounded hopeful but crumbled under pressure. I realized how easily repeated words can reshape God into something manageable, always lifting, always affirming, rarely confronting. When lyrics promise outcomes God never guaranteed, faith fractures in suffering. Songs had trained me to expect constant triumph, leaving me unprepared for waiting, loss, and unanswered prayer. Theology wasn't being shaped by what I heard once on a Sunday, but by what I repeated all week without thinking. Lyrics taught me how to interpret silence, how to label hardship, how to measure God's nearness. Without realizing it, I had learned a gospel of moments, not endurance, of atmosphere, not faithfulness. Every redemption story has a turning point where the script is questioned. Mine came when suffering stayed longer than the chorus allowed. I needed words that could hold weight, not just lift emotion. I began listening differently, asking not, is this catchy, but is this true? Some songs fell away because they could not